Hello everyone. Today's lesson is going to be an introduction to ratios. We're going to discuss what ratios are, how to write ratios, and how to simplify ratios. First up, what is a ratio? Well, a ratio is a comparison of two quantities or comparing two numbers. And this can be all sorts of examples. This could be simply comparing how many boys to how many girls are in a class. In cooking, we use ratios for how much flour we put in versus how much sugar we put in, and that ratio is really going to determine how that maybe cake or cookie or whatever you're baking is going to taste. Ratios can also be used in sports and in probabilities. In statistics, we can look at how many baskets a NBA basketball star makes versus how many they miss. And that might determine how good or, how many people like that basketball player because, of course, we always want our team to win. There are three ways to write a ratio, and I'm going to show you those here. So I have a little example problem set up for us, and we're going to be comparing, the first one up is going to be squares to triangles. We are also going to compare triangles to squares because it's very important to notice that order really matters in ratios. So when I say squares to triangles, we need to make sure we write the squares first. So as I count them, I count that I have 4 squares, and the first way I can write this is just using the word 2, and then I have 3 triangles. So the ratio of squares to triangles is 4 to 3. The second way I can write this is using a colon, okay? But we still say the word 2, so I would read this as 4, 2, 3. And the last way I can write this is in kind of fraction form, 4 over 3, but still read as 4, 2, 3. Now, the reason order matters is because if I flip the question around and I want to know triangles to squares, you could write these same 3 formats as 3 to 4, 3 to 4, and 3 to 4. Now, do I have to write all 3 forms every time? No. You're going to pick the form that works best for you. I often find students usually pick one and they kind of go with that. All 3 of these forms for each type of problem are correct, and you'd only have to write one of them. Next, we're going to talk about the 3 types of ratios. The first type is a part-to-part ratio. And the reason it's called a part-to-part ratio in this example is because we are going to be comparing boys to girls. The reason they both are parts is because they make up kids or students or kind of a different whole. So if we want to write the ratio of boys to girls, counting them up, we have 3 boys to 2 girls. I can also say this as for every 3 boys, there are 2 girls, or there are 3 boys for every 2 girls. You're going to hear me saying statements kind of like this because that's our typical explanation for a ratio. The next type of ratio is part to whole. In this case, we are going to be comparing girls to kids. Now for this one, there is an added step because we can count, yep, there's 2 girls. But how many kids are there? Because kids would include boys and girls. And this is where we count them as a whole. Okay, so there are 2 girls right here, but how many kids are there? Well, all total, there are 5 kids. So whenever we start to talk about wholes, we have to make sure we include all of the parts. This next example is very similar to the last one we just did. The change, we're going to talk about a whole 2-part ratio. It's kind of like the opposite of what we did last time. For this whole to part ratio, I think I want to compare kids to boys this time. So for this problem, we'd count up our kids first, and we know that kids include boys and girls. So we have 5 kids to 1, 2, 3 boys. Whole to part, make sure you count everything or all of the parts, and then count the parts you're comparing to. Last but not least, we are going to talk about simplifying ratios. You may remember simplifying from simplifying fractions. And in fact, simplifying ratios and simplifying fractions are very, very similar. To start us off, we are going to be looking at the ratio of boys to girls. So I can just write kind of the regular ratio to start, and I'm going to purposely write this in fraction form because I find many middle school students like to simplify ratios just like they simplify fractions. And what you may remember is when we're simplifying, we want to factor out kind of those common factors. So what can we divide 6 and 4 by? Well, they're both even, so I'm going to divide both of them by 2. That tells me that we have a simplified ratio of 3 to 2. So we could say the ratio of boys to girls is 6 to 4, but we can also say the ratio of boys to girls is 3 to 2. And what this actually means is I can rearrange my boys and girls here, and what we would find is that if I put 3 boys in a group, I can also have 2 girls with it. Now, I haven't added any kids to this ratio here, but we get this ratio of for every 3 boys in a group, we can have 2 girls. And this other side of this ratio has the same thing. For every 3 boys, there are 2 girls in a group. And that's what simplifying ratios means. And that's also why we always want to simplify ratios. If we think about a cooking recipe, they're going to give us the most simplified ratio that we can. They're going to tell us how much we need to maybe make 1 batch or to make 1 meal. And then from there, if I want to make 3 batches of cookies, I can always multiply it and make it bigger. But why would I want to simplify down when I'm only trying to make 1 batch of something? So the big rule of thumb in ratios is that you always simplify. No matter what, if you can, which you can't always, if you can simplify, always simplify those ratios. For your last check-in here in this video, I want you to pause this video and answer the 3 questions you see on your screen. Please write and simplify, if you can, the ratio of stars to triangles, the ratio of squares to stars, and the ratio of triangles to shapes. Pause your video now if you haven't already, and try to answer these 3 questions. The answers will be appearing on the screen in a little bit. Okay, how'd you do? Did you simplify 1 and 2 as well as writing the ratio? And unfortunately, we couldn't simplify number 3. So, continue on to your practice items now. Let me know if you have any questions.